And I would like to read to you a little bit about Jackson Pollock, who's one of the artists mentioned in the Fancy Nancy book that I've read. And you may have learned a little bit about him already in school. Here's a picture of him. And below him is one of his art pieces that he's working on. Jackson Pollock was born in Cody, Wyoming in 1912. He was the youngest of five brothers and grew up to be one of the greatest artists of the 20th century. This picture of him at this is a picture of him at work in 1950. Jackson is best known for the huge paintings he made by splattering, throwing, and dripping paint onto canvases. This one here is called Galaxy. Jackson used old hardened brushes, sticks, and anything else he could find that would splatter the paint the way he liked. In this cartoon it says, "Can I borrow these a minute? I just had a great idea." She says, "Yes, dear." Jackson's style of art is often called abstract expressionism. Because Jackson moved around a lot and used so much energy while he painted, he preferred to call his style action painting. This piece is called Autumn Rhythm, and it was made in 1950 by Jackson Pollock. Jackson Pollock wanted people to feel and see the energy he felt while painting. Even though you can't recognize any objects in Jackson's most famous paintings, they are filled with expression, movement, and rhythm. This one's called Mural. While Jackson was growing up, his family moved all over the western states, usually from one ranch or farm to another. No matter how much work needed to be done, Mrs. Pollock always preferred to see her sons working on anything having to do with art. It was probably because of her encouragement that three of Jackson's older brothers also became artists. So here they are when they're young. His mom's saying, "I know you need help plowing the fields, slopping the pigs, mending the fences, and building a new outhouse, dear, but the boys are doing their artwork." And he's thinking, darn. When Jackson was 8 years old, his family moved to Janesville, California. Many American Indians lived in the area. Sometimes Jackson and his brothers would sneak up into the mountains to the Indian burial grounds and watch their ceremonial dances. And so it is not always the tree branch you hear knocking against your window. It could be the great demon bear warrior, half man, half bear, and there's Jackson and all his brothers looking scared. An Indian woman who helped take care of Jackson and his brothers often told them Indian legends and stories. That's what's happening here. Years later, Jackson put mythological Indian creatures and symbols in some of his paintings. And this painting here is called Bird. And Jackson Pollock did that one in 1941. When Jackson Pollock was just beginning high school in California, his oldest brother Charles was studying to be an artist in New York. Charles often sent Jackson art magazines and wrote him letters about what he was learning. Jackson always admired his older brother's talent. When Jackson was 18, his brother Charles returned home for a visit. When it was time for Charles to return to New York, Jackson went with him. He had decided to become a serious artist too. When Jackson got to New York, he entered the same art school that Charles was going to and had the same teacher, Thomas Hart Benton. There's a little cartoon. "Goodbye, Mom. I'm off to be a serious artist," says Jackson. "Well then, don't forget your crayons, watercolors, and coloring book," says his mom. Thomas Hart Benton was already a famous American artist by that time. He was known for his large murals. A mural is a huge painting made to cover a wall or ceiling of a building. Jackson assisted Thomas Benton on some of his murals by posing, mixing paints, and cleaning the studio. So this painting here was not by Jackson Pollock. This was by his teacher, Thomas Hart Benton in 1932, and it's called Arts of the West. Jackson learned how paintings were made and tried to make his paintings look like Thomas Benton's. But Jackson had a difficult time giving his paintings the feeling and finished look he thought Thomas Benton would like. So here's one that Jackson Pollock did in 1934. It's called Going West. So you can see here he's kind of inspired by the style of his teacher. Jackson Pollock always seemed to have trouble drawing things too. No matter how hard he tried to make his drawings look the way he wanted, he just couldn't. It was almost like his hand and pencil refused to do what he wanted them to do. He says, "Unless you want to end up like them, you better do as I say. Got it? Okay, says his pencil. There's all the pile of broken pencils. Jackson became angry and upset, but teachers kept working with him because they knew how much he wanted to be an artist. The dark, gloomy look Jackson gave himself in the painting above might show how frustrated he felt. So here's a self-portrait he did in 1930. It's kind of got a dark mood there, showing his frustration. One day, Jackson joined the workshop of a famous Mexican mural painter. David Cisqueros and his friends were experimenting with new types of paint and different ways of painting. They mixed oil colors with paint used for cars. They poured their colorful mixtures onto large canvases and spray painted different surfaces just to see what would happen. Jackson was surprised. He noticed that beautiful and interesting shapes were being created. Jackson thought that what he was learning at the Cisqueros workshop might help him create his own artwork without having to draw perfectly. He says, "Oh gosh, oh gee whiz, I'm sorry, I just dumped a can of paint all over your work." And this one says, "You are a genius. Nice going, Jackson. I love it. It's perfect." So he wasn't great at drawing perfectly, but he found his own way to express himself. During this time, Jackson learned all he could from the artwork of other modern artists whose paintings were shown at museums and galleries all over New York. Jackson loved the mysterious, frightening, dreamlike scenes Jose Orozco painted in his murals. The strong, powerful shapes and symbols Pablo Picasso used reminded Jackson of American Indian art and brought back memories from his past. So this one is Jose Orozco with the bones, and this is Pablo Picasso's Guernica. Jackson started to combine all the things he had learned with shapes and symbols from his own imagination. Soon his paintings started to look very different from anything he'd ever done before. He was finally developing his own way of painting, and other people began noticing his brightly colored work. So you can see his style beginning to change. These are both by Jackson Pollock. Jackson kept using his imagination and began to create paintings that really were different. Symbols and shapes started to disappear. His works became larger. He started to drip and splatter paint all over his canvas as a way to show his feelings. In 1945, Jackson bought a farmhouse and married his girlfriend, Lee Krasner. Lee was an artist too. She used one of the bedrooms of the house for a studio, and Jackson used the barn. So there's Jackson Pollock and his wife. Jackson usually tacked his canvas to the barn floor. He liked to walk all around and be in his painting while he worked. This way, Jackson felt he was really a part of his work. "Jackson, can you come to the phone?" "Later, I'm right in the middle of a painting." Jackson Pollock died in a car accident in 1956 when he was only 44 years old. Even though he became famous during his life, he was often very unhappy. Important people from all over the world loved to talk and write and argue about his exciting new paintings, but hardly anyone bought his work until years later. This one's called Night Sounds. And this one's called White Light. These are small pictures, but they were actually very big paintings. Sometimes people have trouble understanding Jackson Pollock's paintings. They feel that anyone could have just thrown paint around and done just as good a job. But Jackson knew exactly what he was doing. When you stand in front of a huge Jackson Pollock painting, you can get a feeling of being surrounded by light and color, movement and energy that is very exciting. This one's called Number 13A Arabesque. It's a good idea to see Jackson Pollock's paintings in person. The special feeling you get of being in an explosion of color and energy has a lot to do with their large size. The metallic and other different types of paint Jackson used help add to that feeling too. All right, hope you enjoyed learning a little more about Jackson Pollock, and I'll be doing some other artist books too, and maybe you'll be able to get inspired and create some of your own art while you're at home for a while. We'd love to see it when we see you again.